Forget what you think you know about O'Hare. When the sun sets, this airport transforms into a place where the normal rules don't apply. There are 6 unspoken, chilling directives that dictate survival for those who work the night shift. Break even one, and you might not make it to sunrise. This isn't just a job, it's a test of your sanity. My name is Daniel Torres, and I've been working the night shift at O'Hare International Airport for 3 years now. 3 years of watching the world's second busiest airport transform from a bustling hub of human activity into something that defies explanation. Most people see O'Hare during the day. The chaos, the crowds, the constant movement of travelers rushing to catch flights or reunite with loved ones. But after midnight, when the last commercial flight departs and the cleaning crews finish their rounds, O'Hare becomes something else entirely. The transformation doesn't happen gradually. It's sudden, like a switch being flipped. One moment you're surrounded by the familiar sounds of rolling luggage, chattering passengers, and boarding announcements. The next, you're standing in what feels like the skeleton of a place that was once alive. The silence isn't peaceful. It's hungry, waiting to be filled with things that shouldn't exist in the daylight world. I remember my first night shift vividly. The supervisor, an older man named Peterson who'd been working nights for over a decade, gave me the standard orientation. He showed me the security routes, explained the minimal staffing protocols, and walked me through the basic maintenance checks. Everything seemed routine until he stopped at Terminal 2, Gate B7. His expression changed, and he looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. "Kid," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "there are things they don't put in the employee handbook. Rules that aren't written down anywhere, but are more important than any policy manual. You follow these rules, you go home safe. You ignore them." He trailed off, staring down the empty concourse. Well, let's just say we've had people who didn't make it through their probationary period. At first, I thought he was trying to scare the new guy. Every workplace has its hazing rituals, right? But as Peterson continued speaking, I realized this wasn't a joke. His hands were trembling slightly, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool air conditioning. "Rule number 1, he began, and this is the most important one, never acknowledge the whispers. The whispers. Even now, 3 years later, I can hear them as I write this. They start around 1:47 a.m., always at exactly the same time. At first, you might mistake them for the ventilation system or maybe voices carrying from another terminal. But if you listen closely, and God help you if you do, you'll realize they're not coming from any earthly source. That first night, I heard them begin as Peterson and I walked through Terminal 1. Soft, barely audible murmurs that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. I stopped walking and tilted my head, trying to make out what they were saying. Peterson's hand clamped down on my shoulder like a vice. "Don't," he hissed. "Whatever you do, don't try to understand them. Don't respond. Don't even look like you can hear them." But it was too late. I'd already paused, already shown that I was aware of the voices. And in that moment, the temperature in the terminal dropped by at least 10 degrees. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and I could swear I heard my name being called from somewhere in the darkness beyond the gate areas. "Daniel. Daniel Torres. Come find us, Daniel." Peterson pulled me forward with surprising strength for a man his age. We walked quickly through the terminal, and gradually the voices faded. But not before I heard something that made my blood run cold. Laughter. Soft, echoing laughter that seemed to follow us as we made our way back to the security office. "That was mild," Peterson said once we were safely behind locked doors. "You got lucky. Some people, on their first night, they answer back. They try to have a conversation. Those people don't usually last long in this job." He poured himself a cup of coffee with hands that were still shaking. The thing about working nights at O'Hare is that you're not just dealing with an empty airport. You're dealing with echoes, memories of all the people who've passed through here, all the emotions left behind. Fear, anxiety, grief, joy, desperation. It all builds up over time, and at night, when there's nothing to mask it, it becomes active. I wanted to laugh it off, to tell him he was being ridiculous. But I couldn't forget the sound of those voices calling my name. How could they have known my name? I hadn't been introduced to anyone except Peterson, and he certainly hadn't shouted my full name down any empty corridors. The rest of that first shift was uneventful, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every shadow seemed to move in my peripheral vision. Every reflection in the terminal's countless windows appeared to show something that shouldn't be there. By the time my shift ended at 6 a.m., I was exhausted not from work, but from the constant state of alertness I'd maintained throughout the night. As I prepared to leave, Peterson stopped me at the exit. "You did well tonight," he said. "Most new hires don't make it through their first shift without breaking at least 2 rules. You only bent one, and that's forgivable. How many rules are there?" I asked. Peterson's smile was grim. 6, and each one is more important than the last. Tomorrow night, I'll tell you about Rule 2. But Daniel, he grabbed my arm as I turned to go. Whatever you do, don't talk about this to anyone during the day. Day shift doesn't understand. They think we're all crazy, and maybe we are, but we're alive, and that's what matters. I drove home through the early morning Chicago traffic, trying to process what I'd experienced. The rational part of my mind wanted to dismiss it all as elaborate hazing or the result of working in a creepy environment. But the whispers, those whispers have been real, and they had known my name. Over the following weeks, I began to understand what Peterson meant about O'Hare transforming at night. During my first month on the job, I witnessed things that challenged everything I thought I knew about reality. Shadows that moved independently of their sources. Sounds that had no origin. Lights that flickered in patterns that seemed almost like Morse code, spelling out messages I was afraid to decode. But the whispers were constant. Every night at 1:47 a.m., they would begin. Sometimes they were in English, sometimes in languages I didn't recognize. Often, they seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. The walls, the ceiling, the floor beneath my feet. And always, they try to engage me in conversation. "Daniel, we know you can hear us. Why won't you answer, Daniel? We have so much to tell you." Following Peterson's advice, I never responded. I learned to keep my expression neutral, to continue my rounds as if nothing unusual was happening. But inside, my heart would race every time they called my name, because deep down, a part of me wanted to answer. A part of me was desperately curious about what they had to say. On my 7th night, I broke the first rule. I was conducting a routine security check of Terminal 3 when the whispers began earlier than usual, 1:23 a.m. instead of 1:47. But this time, they weren't just calling my name. They were talking about my family, sharing details about my life that no one at the airport could possibly know. "Your sister Elena is getting married next month, isn't she, Daniel? Your mother still lights a candle for your father every Sunday. You never told anyone about the accident when you were 12, did you?" I stopped walking. The knowledge they displayed was impossible, terrifying, and somehow deeply personal. These weren't just random voices. They knew me in ways that went beyond my employment file. "How do you know that?" I whispered, barely breathing the words. The moment I spoke, the temperature plummeted. Every light in Terminal 3 began flickering in unison, and the whispers exploded into a cacophony of voices, all talking at once. I could hear dozens, maybe hundreds of different people, all speaking directly to me, all eager to finally have a conversation. He answered. He finally answered. "Daniel, we've been waiting so long to talk to you. You're special, Daniel. You can hear us when others can't. We need your help, Daniel. There are things you must know." I ran through Terminal 3, down the moving walkways, past the darkened shops and restaurants, while the voices followed me. They echoed from every speaker system in the terminal, growing louder and more insistent with each step I took. By the time I reached the security office, I was hyperventilating and covered in sweat. Peterson was waiting for me, along with another night shift worker I'd never met before, a woman named Janet Rodriguez who worked maintenance in the cargo areas. Both of them looked grim. "You broke the first rule," Peterson said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, still trying to catch my breath. Janet shook her head sadly. "How bad is it? Do they follow you?" As if in answer to her question, the intercom system in the security office crackled to life, and the voices poured through the speakers. "Daniel, come back to us, Daniel. We're not finished talking." Peterson quickly shut off the intercom, but we could still hear them, muffled now, but persistent. "This is bad," he said. "Once they know you can hear them, they don't stop. They'll follow you home, Daniel. They'll be in your dreams, in your head, in every quiet moment." "What do I do?" I asked, panic rising in my voice. Janet pulled out a small cloth bag from her pocket and handed it to me. Inside was a mixture of salt, sage, and something else I couldn't identify. "Keep this with you at all times," she said. "It won't make them go away, but it'll muffle them, make them easier to ignore. And whatever you do," Peterson added, "don't break any more rules. The first one is forgivable if you're careful and take precautions. But if you break a second rule..." He exchanged a look with Janet. "Well, let's just say we'll have to start training a replacement." The cloth bag Janet gave me became my lifeline. Within hours of breaking the first rule, the whispers had followed me home. They spoke to me through my apartment's heating vents, through the static on my radio, through the white noise of my air conditioner. Sleep became impossible until I clutched that little bag of herbs and salt. Even then, I could hear them, distant but persistent, like voices calling from the bottom of a well. When I returned to work the following night, Peterson was waiting for me with a cup of coffee and a serious expression. The shadows under his eyes seemed deeper, and I noticed his hand shook more than usual as he reviewed the night's assignments. "The whispers visited you at home, didn't they?" he asked without preamble. I nodded. "How did you know?" "Because they visit all of us who've broken the first rule. Some people quit after the first night of home visits. Can't handle having their personal space invaded. But you're here, which means you've got the constitution for this job. That's good, because tonight I'm going to tell you about Rule 2. He led me through Terminal 1, past the darkened shops and empty gates. Our footsteps echoed strangely in the vast space, creating sounds that seemed to bounce back from places they shouldn't be able to reach. As we walked, I could hear the whispers beginning, right on schedule at 1:47 a.m. "Daniel, why are you ignoring us now? We miss talking with you. We have so much more to show you." I gripped Janet's cloth bag tighter and focused on Peterson's voice as he explained the night's patrol routes. The herbs helped, making the voices sound like they were coming from underwater, but they were still there, still calling my name with increasing desperation. We stopped at a service corridor I'd never seen before, marked with a simple sign, "Authorized personnel only, terminal maintenance." Peterson produced a key card and swiped it through the reader. The heavy metal door opened with a pneumatic hiss, revealing a long hallway lined with pipes and electrical conduits. "This is where Rule 2 applies," Peterson said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Never enter the Hall of Forgotten Flights alone." The hallway stretched ahead of us, disappearing into darkness beyond the reach of the sparse emergency lighting. As we began walking, I noticed doors along both sides, dozens of them, each marked with gate numbers that didn't correspond to any gates I knew existed in the public areas of the airport. "What is this place?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "Every airport has spaces like this," Peterson explained. "Areas that were designed for gates that were never built, or corridors that were walled off during renovations. But at O'Hare, these forgotten spaces have accumulated things." As we walked deeper into the hallway, I began to see what he meant. The first door we passed, marked Gate F47, was slightly ajar. Through the gap, I could see piles of luggage. Not modern suitcases, but older bags, trunks, and cases that looked like they belonged to a different era entirely. Are those? I began. Lost luggage that was never claimed, Peterson said. Some of it's been here for decades. But look closer. I peered through the gap and felt my blood run cold. Mixed in with the luggage were personal items that seemed far too intimate to have been lost in transit. A wedding dress, yellowed with age. A child's teddy bear with button eyes that seemed to track my movement. A military uniform with medals still pinned to the chest. How did all this end up here? Peterson's face was grim in the emergency lighting. That's the wrong question, Daniel. The right question is, why do these items call the people who walk this hall alone? As if summoned by his words, I heard it. A sound different from the whispers that had been plaguing me. This was singing, soft and melodic, coming from somewhere deeper in the corridor. A woman's voice, singing what sounded like a lullaby in a language I didn't recognize. Don't listen to it, Peterson warned, but he was too late. The melody was beautiful, haunting, and it pulled at something deep in my chest. I found myself taking a step toward the sound, then another. Peterson grabbed my arm. That's exactly what I'm talking about. People walk this hall alone, and they hear things that call to them. Music, voices, sounds from their childhood. They follow those sounds, and sometimes... He gestured to another door. This one marked Gate K12. Through the gap in this door, I could see something that made my stomach lurch. A security uniform, neatly folded on a chair. Next to it, a name tag, Rodriguezum, Miguel Rodriguez. Peterson said quietly. He worked here for 2 years. Good man, reliable. But he broke Rule 2. Came down here alone one night. Chasing what he said was his grandmother's voice calling for help. We found his uniform, his radio, his flashlight, but we never found Miguel. The singing grew louder, more insistent. It was joined by other sounds, a child crying, an elderly man calling for help, what sounded like a whole family having a conversation in Spanish, all of it echoing from the depths of the corridor. Where do these sounds come from? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I didn't want to know. O'Hare has been here in some form since the 1940s. Peterson explained as we continued our walk. Millions of people have passed through, carrying their hopes, fears, sorrows, and joys. Strong emotions leave impressions, Daniel. And when people disappear, which happens more often at airports than you might think, those impressions can become concentrated. We passed more doors, each one revealing glimpses of impossible scenes. Gate D33 contained what looked like a 1950s air departure lounge, complete with vintage furniture and departure boards showing flights to cities that no longer existed under those names. Gate H19 held children's toys from different decades, arranged as if a playroom had been frozen in time. But it was Gate 8 that stopped me cold. Through the slightly open door, I could see a small office space, and sitting at a desk, writing in a logbook, was a figure in a security uniform. He looked up as we passed, and for just a moment, our eyes met. He looked exactly like me. I stumbled backward, nearly colliding with Peterson. Did you see Dash? I saw, Peterson said grimly. That's why we never walk this hall alone, Daniel. The forgotten flights aren't just about luggage and lost items. Sometimes they're about the people who never made it home. And sometimes those people are versions of ourselves that got lost along the way. The figure in the office had returned his writing, but I could feel his presence like a weight in my chest. What was he writing? Reports, probably. Logs of things that never happened. Security checks for flights that were never scheduled. The hall shows us what could have been, what might have been, what should have been. It's dangerous to look too long because you might start to think that version of your life is more real than the one you're actually living. As we reached the end of the corridor, Peterson showed me the proper exit procedures. 2 people had to confirm they were both present and accounted for before leaving the hall. We've had people get turned around in here, he explained. They think they found a shortcut back to the main terminal, but they end up in versions of O'Hare that don't quite match reality. Different gate numbers, different shops, different personnel. By the time they realize something's wrong, they can't find their way back to the real airport. The door we exited through led back to Terminal 2, but as we emerged, I noticed something odd. The gate numbers weren't quite right. We should have been near Gate B7, but the signs indicated we were at Gate B3. Peterson, I said, pointing at the discrepancy. He looked at the signs and swore under his breath. This happens sometimes when you spend too much time in the hall. Reality gets a little flexible. Give it a few minutes, and everything should snap back to normal. Sure enough, as we walked toward the security office, I watched the gate numbers shift and change until they matched my mental map of the terminal. But the experience left me deeply unsettled. If the airport itself could change around us, what else might not be quite what it seemed? When we reached the office, Peterson poured himself another cup of coffee and offered me one. "You did well tonight," he said. "Most people panic when they see themselves in one of those rooms. But you kept walking. What would have happened if I'd gone in there? If I tried to talk to him?" Peterson's expression was grave. "I don't know, and I never want to find out. But I suspect that's how people disappear. They see something in one of those rooms, a version of themselves, a lost loved one, a life they wish they'd lived, and they step through the door. After that, they become part of the hall, part of the forgotten flights." The whispers have been quiet during our walk through the hall, but now they returned with renewed intensity. They seemed agitated, almost angry. "Why won't you come back to us, Daniel? We showed you something special tonight. Did you like seeing yourself? We have more to show you." I clutched Janet's cloth bag tighter and tried to ignore them, but Peterson noticed my discomfort. "They're getting stronger, aren't they?" he said. "That's what happens when you break rules. Each violation makes them more persistent, gives them more power over you. That's why the remaining rules are so important. Each one you break makes the previous ones harder to follow." As my shift ended, Peterson walked me to the parking garage. "Tomorrow night, I'll tell you about Rule 3, he said. "But Daniel, I need you to promise me something. Don't come back here during the day. Don't try to find that service corridor on your own. And whatever you do, don't try to research the people whose belongings you saw in those rooms." "Why not?" "Because sometimes learning too much about the forgotten flights makes you want to join them. And once you start down that path, there's no coming back." I drove home as dawn broke over Chicago, but the image of that other Daniel, sitting calmly at his desk, writing in his logbook, stayed with me. What was he writing? What version of reality was he documenting? And most disturbing of all, did he know about me the same way I now knew about him? The whispers followed me home again, but this time they were different. Mixed in with their usual pleas for attention, I could hear new voices, older voices, voices that sounded like they'd been calling from the Hall of Forgotten Flights for a very long time. "Join us, Daniel. You belong here with us. Stop fighting what you know is true." I held Janet's cloth bag against my chest and tried to sleep, but my dreams were filled with endless corridors, forgotten gates, and the sound of my own voice calling for help from rooms I'd never entered. When I woke up that evening, I found a message on my voicemail. It was my own voice, but speaking words I'd never said. "This is Daniel Torres, reporting for duty at Gate R8. All systems normal. All passengers accounted for. End of log." I deleted the message, but I couldn't delete the chill that ran down my spine. The Hall of Forgotten Flights wasn't just a place I'd visited. Somehow, it had followed me home. The message on my voicemail, my own voice reporting for duty at a gate that shouldn't exist, made sleep impossible. I spent the day pacing my apartment, clutching Janet's cloth bag, and trying to convince myself that what I'd experienced was some kind of hallucination brought on by stress and lack of sleep. But deep down, I knew better. The Hall of Forgotten Flights had shown me a truth I wasn't ready to accept. Reality at O'Hare was far more fragile than I'd ever imagined. When I arrived for my shift that night, I found Peterson waiting for me with a new companion, a man I'd never seen before. He was tall and thin, with prematurely gray hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. His security uniform was impeccably pressed, but there was something about him that seemed incomplete, as if he wasn't quite all there. "Daniel, this is Raymond Walsh," Peterson said. "He's been working nights here longer than anyone. 15 years. Raymond extended his hand, and when I shook it, his skin was cold as ice. "Peterson's told me about your progress," he said, his voice carrying a slight echo, as if he were speaking from the bottom of a well. "Breaking the first rule, surviving the Hall of Forgotten Flights. You're adapting well to our unique work environment." There was something unsettling about the way he said "our," as if he belonged to O'Hare in a way that went beyond employment. But before I could analyze the feeling further, Peterson was leading us toward Terminal 3. "Tonight, you learn Rule 3, Peterson announced as we walked. "And Raymond here is going to help demonstrate why it's so important." Rule 3, as it turned out, was deceptively simple. Don't look too closely at the shadows. "Every building has shadows," Raymond explained as we entered the main concourse of Terminal 3. "But airports collect shadows the way they collect people. Thousands pass through every day, and each person casts a shadow. Most of those shadows behave normally. They follow their owners. They disappear when the lights change. They stay where they belong." He gestured to the empty terminal around us. Despite the absence of passengers, Terminal 3 wasn't completely dark. Emergency lighting cast a dim glow throughout the concourse, creating pockets of light and shadow that shifted subtly as we moved. "But some shadows," Raymond continued, "develop a life of their own." As if to demonstrate his point, a shadow moved across the wall to our left. At first, it looked normal, the silhouette of a person walking. But as I watched, I realized there was no one casting a shadow. It moved independently, walking along the wall as if the person creating it was invisible. "My first instinct," Peterson said, "was to look closer, to try to figure out where that shadow was coming from. That's what most people do. They stare, they follow the shadows with their eyes. They try to make sense of what they're seeing. And that's when the shadows notice you," Raymond added, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. As we continued through the terminal, I began to see them everywhere. Shadows that moved wrong, too fast, too slow, in directions that defied the light sources. Shadows of people who weren't there, shadows of objects that didn't exist, shadows that seemed to turn and look directly at us as we passed. "The key," Peterson explained, "is peripheral awareness. You acknowledge that the shadows are there, but you don't engage with them directly. Don't stare, don't follow them, and most importantly, don't try to interact with them." "What happens if you do?" I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I didn't want to know the answer. Raymond and Peterson exchanged a look. "Show him the break room," Raymond said. We took a service elevator to the lower level of Terminal 3, emerging into a corridor that felt different from the rest of the airport. The lighting here was fluorescent and harsh, but somehow it created more shadows instead of fewer. Every corner, every doorway, every junction in the hallway seemed to harbor darkness that moved when you weren't looking directly at it. The break room was at the end of the corridor, and as Peterson opened the door, I understood why Raymond had wanted me to see it. The room was normal enough: tables, chairs, vending machines, a small kitchenette. But every shadow in the room was wrong. The shadow cast by the refrigerator showed the silhouette of a person standing with their arms raised. The shadow of the microwave looked like a crouched figure. The shadows of the chairs showed people sitting in them, though the chairs were empty. "This is what happens," Peterson said, "when someone spends too much time looking at the shadows. Eventually, the shadows start looking back. As we stood in the doorway, I watched the shadow figures move. They turned their heads toward us, raised their arms in greeting, gestured for us to come closer. And despite every instinct screaming at me to look away, I found myself drawn to them. Daniel, Raymond's voice cut through my fascination. Step back from the doorway. I took a step back, and immediately the pull lessened. But I could still see the shadow figures, and now they seemed agitated, reaching toward the doorway as if trying to escape the confines of the break room. Who are they? I asked. Former employees, mostly, Peterson said grimly. People who broke Rule 3 and got too fascinated by what they were seeing. The shadows absorbed them somehow, made them part of the darkness. They're still here, in a sense, but not in any way that matters. Raymond closed the door, and the immediate sense of wrongness faded. But as we walked back toward the elevator, I could feel eyes on my back, shadow eyes, watching from every corner and crevice. The shadows are attracted to attention, Raymond explained as we rode the elevator back up. The more you look at them, the more real they become. And the more real they become, the more they want to interact with the world of light and substance. Eventually, they find a way to pull someone into their realm. Back in the main terminal, I try to follow their advice. I kept my eyes focused ahead, using only my peripheral vision to track the moving shadows around us. But it was incredibly difficult. Every instinct wanted me to turn and look, to try to understand what I was seeing. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. My own shadow, cast by the emergency lighting, was moving wrong. While I walked straight ahead, my shadow seemed to lag behind, and occasionally it would turn to look at things I wasn't looking at. Peterson, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. My shadow. He glanced down and swore under his breath. When did this start? I just noticed it. Raymond moved to my other side and examined my shadow from a different angle. It's minor, he said after a moment. Probably started when you look directly at the break room shadows. But it's containable if we act quickly. They led me to a maintenance closet filled with cleaning supplies and industrial equipment. Raymond pulled out what looked like a high-powered flashlight, but with an unusual blue-tinted bulb. This is going to sound strange, he said, but I need you to stand directly under this light and have a conversation with your shadow. Tell it to stay with you, to follow your movements, to remember its proper place. You want me to talk to my shadow? Trust us, Peterson said. We've dealt with this before. I stood under the blue light, feeling somewhat ridiculous, and looked down at my shadow. Under the unusual illumination, it appeared more solid, more defined than normal shadows. And as I watched, it turned to face me directly. You need to stay with me, I said, feeling foolish. You're my shadow. You follow my movements, not your own. The shadow seemed to consider this, tilting its head as if thinking. Then, slowly, it nodded and moved into alignment with my body. Good, Raymond said, switching off the light. That should hold for a while. But you'll need to repeat the process every few days until the connection stabilizes. As we left the maintenance closet, I had to ask, how do you know all this? How do you know about shadow conversations and blue lights and all the rest of it? Raymond smiled, but there was something sad about the expression, because I've been dealing with these things longer than anyone else. I was one of the first people to discover the rules, back when O'Hare's night shift was just starting to develop its unique characteristics. What do you mean? Peterson answered instead. Raymond broke Rule 3 about 10 years ago. Spent too much time studying the shadows, trying to understand them. By the time we figure out how to help him, he was already partially absorbed into the shadow realm. I looked at Raymond more closely and realized what had been bothering me since we met. In certain lights, he appeared slightly transparent. His edges seemed softer than they should be, as if he wasn't quite solid. I exist in both worlds now, Raymond explained matter-of-factly. The world of light and the world of shadows. It has its advantages, I can see things others can't, understand the airport's supernatural ecosystem in ways that pure humans cannot. But it also means I can never fully leave O'Hare. The shadows hold part of me, and if I go too far from the airport, that part starts to fade. The implications of this hit me like a physical blow. Are you saying that if I keep breaking rules, I'll end up like you? Or worse, Peterson said grimly. At least Raymond retained his consciousness and personality. Some people who break multiple rules lose themselves entirely, become something else entirely. As if summoned by our conversation, the whispers began again, right on schedule at 1:47 a.m. But tonight, they seem to know about my shadow troubles. Your shadow is beautiful when it moves on its own, Daniel. We can teach you to dance, to play, to explore. Wouldn't you like to see what your shadow sees when you're not watching? I gripped Janet's cloth bag tighter and forced myself to look straight ahead. But in my peripheral vision, I could see my shadow turning toward the voices as if it wanted to respond to their calls. The shadow connection makes the whispers stronger, Raymond warned. They can use your shadow as an anchor, a way to pull more of you into their realm. You need to be especially careful about the remaining rules. We completed the rest of our patrol in relative silence, but I was hyper-aware of every shadow around us. The terminal seemed to pulse with movement in the darkness, shapes that shouldn't exist, figures that followed parallel paths to ours, silhouettes that watched us from corners and alcoves. As dawn approached and my shift ended, Peterson walked me to the parking garage one more time. You're handling this better than most, he said, but I need you to understand something. Each rule you break makes you more connected to O'Hare's supernatural ecosystem. Eventually, if you break too many rules, you won't be able to leave at all. What do you mean? I mean that people who break 4 or more rules become permanent residents. They can't quit, can't transfer to day shift, can't even take vacation days. The airport won't let them go. As I drove home, I noticed that my car's shadow on the street was moving independently again, swerving and weaving as if driving its own path. By the time I reached my apartment, my reflection in a rearview mirror was pointing in a different direction than I was looking. The whispers followed me home as usual, but now they were joined by a new sound, the soft, rustling noise of shadows moving across my walls. When I finally fell asleep, clutching the cloth bag and the blue light Raymond had given me, my dreams were filled with darkness that moved like living things, reaching out to pull me deeper into their realm. I woke up that evening to find shadow handprints on my bedroom walls, dozens of them, as if invisible people had been pressing their palms against the surface while I slept. The blue light Raymond had given me revealed them clearly, showing the distinct outlines of fingers and palms in various sizes. Some were small, like children's hands. Others were impossibly large, with fingers that stretched longer than any human anatomy should allow. When I arrived at O'Hare that night, Peterson was waiting with someone new, a woman named Carmen Vasquez who worked in the airport's administrative offices during the night shift. She had short-cropped black hair and wore wire-rimmed glasses that seemed to magnify her dark eyes. Unlike Raymond's otherworldly transparency, Carmen appeared completely solid, but there was something about her demeanor that suggested she'd seen things that had fundamentally changed her perspective on reality. Carmen handles our special documentation, Peterson explained as we walked toward Terminal 4. She's the one who maintains the records that the day's shift never sees. What kind of records? I asked, though I was beginning to understand that every question I asked at O'Hare led to answers I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. Carmen adjusted her glasses and pulled out a tablet from her messenger bag. Passenger manifests for flights that don't officially exist. Security footage of people who aren't supposed to be in the airport after hours. Maintenance reports for areas that aren't on any official blueprints. She swiped through several files on her tablet, showing me documents that looked official but contained impossible information. Flight records for airlines that have been defunct for decades. Passenger lists with names and languages that used alphabets I didn't recognize. Security incident reports describing encounters with individuals who had no identification, no tickets, and no apparent way to have entered the secure areas of the airport. This brings us to Rule 4. Peterson said as we entered Terminal 4's main concourse. Never interact with passengers you encounter after the last scheduled departure. The terminal around us appeared empty, but as my eyes adjusted to the dim emergency lighting, I began to see them. Figures sitting in the gate areas, standing near the windows, walking slowly through the corridors. At first glance, they looked like normal travelers, men and women of various ages, some carrying luggage, others reading newspapers or checking their phones. But something was fundamentally wrong with all of them. They're not solid, I whispered, realizing that I could see through them to the walls and furniture behind. Semi-corporeal manifestations, Carmen said matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather. We call them the unseen passengers. They appear to be people who had strong emotional connections to travel. Individuals who died while waiting for flights, people who disappeared during layovers, passengers who were so frequent travelers that part of them never really left the airport. As we walked through the terminal, I observed the unseen passengers more closely. They went through the motions of normal airport behavior, checking departure boards, sitting in waiting areas, moving between gates. But their movements were wrong, as if they were following script from different time periods. A woman in a 1960s style dress and pillbox hat sat primly in a departure lounge, reading a newspaper whose headlines I couldn't quite make out. A businessman in an outdated suit paced near a gate, checking a pocket watch instead of a modern timepiece. A family with children who looked too perfect, too clean, sat in a circle playing a board game that seemed to shift and change every time I looked away. The key to Rule 4, Peterson explained, is to treat them like background scenery. Don't make eye contact, don't try to help them, and absolutely don't respond if they try to communicate with you. As if summoned by his words, one of the unseen passengers, a middle-aged man in a pilot's uniform, approached us. He moved with a jerky, uncertain gait of someone who wasn't quite sure how to control their own body. "Excuse me," the pilot said, his voice echoing strangely as if coming from very far away. "Could you tell me what time my flight to Denver is scheduled to depart?" Every instinct I had urged me to help him. He looked confused, lost, and genuinely in need of assistance. But Peterson gripped my arm tightly and kept walking, forcing me to follow. The pilot kept pace with us for several steps, repeating his question with increasing urgency. "Please, I need to know about my flight. I can't miss my flight. My family is waiting for me in Denver." "Don't respond," Peterson hissed under his breath. "No matter what he says, don't engage." The pilot's voice began to change, becoming more desperate, more distorted. "I've been waiting here for so long. I just want to go home. Why won't anyone help me? Why can't anyone see me?" I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized the tragedy of what I was witnessing. This man, or the echo of him, had probably been trapped in the airport for years, maybe decades, replaying the same desperate attempt to catch a flight that would never come. Carmen must have seen the expression on my face because she leaned closer and whispered, "He's been here since 1987. Captain James Morrison, United Airlines. His plane crashed during takeoff in a snowstorm. He never accepted that he was dead, so part of him stayed behind, still trying to catch flights." The pilot finally stopped following us, but his voice carried across the terminal. "I just want to go home. I just want to see my family again." Other unseen passengers were scattered throughout Terminal 4, each one seemingly trapped in their own personal loop of airport purgatory. A young woman in 1990s grunge fashion sat at a gate, surrounded by luggage that appeared to be packed for a trip that would never happen. An elderly couple held hands on a bench, staring at a departure board that showed flights from 30 years ago. "How many of them are there?" I asked. We estimate around 300 throughout the entire airport, Carmen replied, consulting her tablet. The number fluctuates. Sometimes new ones appear after particularly tragic incidents. Sometimes old ones fade away, presumably when they finally accept their situation and move on. But some of them have been here for decades. The longest-term resident we've documented is a woman named Elizabeth Chun, Carmen said, pulling up a file on her tablet. She's been here since 1962. According to her records, she was supposed to meet her fiancé here before their wedding, but he died in a car accident on his way to the airport. She never learned about his death, so she's still waiting for him at gate A14 in Terminal 1. The tragedy of it was overwhelming. Hundreds of people trapped in an endless cycle of waiting, hoping, and disappointment, unable to move on because they couldn't accept the reality of their situations. But as we continued our patrol, I began to notice something even more disturbing. The unseen passengers were paying attention to us, specifically to me. They turned their heads as we passed, followed our movement with their eyes, and several of them began gravitating toward our group. "They're watching me," I said to Peterson. "That's because you broke the first rule," he replied grimly. "When you acknowledged the whispers, you made yourself visible to the supernatural ecosystem of the airport. The unseen passengers can sense that you can see them, hear them, interact with their realm." A woman in a flight attendant uniform from the 1970s approached us, her smile too bright, too perfect. "Excuse me, sir," she said to me directly. "Would you like something to drink? We have coffee, tea, or soft drinks available." I started to shake my head, to politely decline, but Peterson grabbed my shoulder. "Don't respond to her at all. Not even nonverbal communication." The flight attendant's smile faltered slightly. "Sir, can you hear me?" I asked if you'd like something to drink. I forced myself to look straight ahead and keep walking, but it felt impossibly rude. The woman looked hurt, confused by my apparent ignoring of her polite offer. "Please, sir," she continued, her voice taking on a desperate edge. "I'm just trying to do my job. I've been trying to do my job for so long, and no one ever responds. Please, just acknowledge that you can see me." The pain in her voice was heartbreaking, but Peterson's grip on my shoulder remained firm. We continued walking, and, eventually, the flight attendant stopped following. But I could hear her behind us, sobbing with the sound of someone whose heart had been broken hundreds of times. Carmen made a note on her tablet. "Flight attendant Patricia Wells, PSA Airlines. She'll be more persistent now that she knows you can perceive her. We'll need to add her to your personal interaction log." My what? Every night shift worker develops a personal relationship with certain unseen passengers, she explained. Once they know you can see them, they become attached. They'll seek you out specifically, try to engage you in conversation, attempt to get you to help them with their particular obsession. As if to prove her point, several other unseen passengers began converging on our location. The pilot who had asked about Denver was back, along with a teenage girl in a cheerleader outfit, a man in military fatigues, and an entire family that appeared to be from the 1950s. "Daniel Torres," the pilot said, and my blood ran cold as I realized he knew my name. "Daniel, I know you can hear us. Please, I just need to know about my flight to Denver." The teenage girl spoke up next. "I'm supposed to meet my parents at baggage claim. They're going to be so worried if I don't show up." The military man stepped forward. "Son, I need to report to my commanding officer. Can you tell me how to get to the military transport area?" The 1950s family surrounded us, each member speaking at once. "We need to catch our connection to California. Our vacation reservations will be canceled if we're late. The children are getting restless. Won't someone please help us?" I felt overwhelmed by their collective desperation, their obvious pain and confusion. These weren't malevolent entities trying to harm me. They were lost souls who genuinely needed help, who had been trapped in this purgatory for decades, ignored and dismissed by everyone who could see them. "I want to help them," I said to Peterson, barely keeping my voice steady. "I know you do," he replied. "And that compassion is exactly what makes you dangerous to them and them dangerous to you." "What do you mean?" Carmen answered. "The unseen passengers feed off attention, acknowledgement, and especially compassion. When someone like you, someone who can see them and wants to help, gives them what they crave, it makes them stronger. But it also makes them more desperate, more demanding. They'll follow you home, invade your dreams, and eventually try to pull you into their realm so they can have a permanent companion." The crowd of unseen passengers was growing larger, more insistent. They pressed closer to us, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of pleas and demands. "Please help us. We've been waiting so long. Don't ignore us like everyone else. We just want to go home." Peterson led us quickly toward an emergency exit, but the unseen passengers followed. As we reached the door, I made the mistake of looking back. The terminal behind us was filled with translucent figures, hundreds of them, all moving toward us with expressions of desperate hope. And at the front of the crowd, reaching out with ghostly fingers, was the flight attendant who had offered me a drink. Her face was streaked with tears, and her mouth was moving in a plea I could lip read, even if I couldn't hear her over the crowd. "Please don't leave us alone again." We exited through the emergency door, but I could feel their presence pressing against the barrier, trying to follow us into the service corridor beyond. "That was mild," Carmen said, making notes on her tablet. "You're lucky you didn't break rule for completely. If you had responded to any of them, they would have followed you home and made your life a living hell." But as we walked back toward the security office, I realized they were already following me. In every reflective surface, the windows, the polished floors, the glass doors, I could see translucent figures walking parallel to our path. The unseen passengers had found a way to stay with me, even if they couldn't physically leave the terminal. When I got home that morning, I found my apartment filled with the ghosts of travelers. They sat on my couch, stood by my windows, gathered around my kitchen table. None of them could interact with my physical space, but they watched me with hopeful eyes, mouthing words I couldn't hear, gesturing for attention I couldn't give them. The whispers were louder now, joined by the desperate voices of the unseen passengers. "Daniel, you can see us. Daniel, we need your help. Daniel, please don't abandon us like everyone else." I spent the day surrounded by ghosts, unable to sleep, unable to find peace, knowing that tomorrow night I would learn about Rule 5 and wondering how much more of this supernatural burden I could bear before I broke completely. I didn't sleep that day. How could I, with dozens of unseen passengers crowding my apartment, their translucent forms moving through my furniture, their silent mouths forming words of desperation I was forbidden to acknowledge? By the time evening came, I looked like hell, dark circles under my eyes, hands shaking from exhaustion and stress. The cloth bag Janet had given me no longer seemed adequate against the supernatural forces pressing in from all sides. When I arrived at O'Hare that night, I found Peterson waiting for me with a grim expression and a cup of coffee that smelled stronger than usual. "You look like you've been through a war," he said, handing me the cup. "They follow me home," I said simply. "All of them. My apartment is full of ghosts." Peterson nodded knowingly. "That's what happens when you've broken 3 rules, Daniel. The airport's supernatural ecosystem has accepted you as part of its ecosystem. You're no longer just an observer. You're a participant." "How do I make it stop?" "That's what Rule 5 addresses," Peterson said. "But first, I need to tell you something. Janet called in sick tonight, and Raymond's disappeared." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean, disappeared?" "He didn't show up for his shift, and when security checked his apartment, they found it empty. All his belongings were there, but he was gone. There was just a note on his kitchen table." Peterson handed me a piece of paper written in Raymond's careful handwriting. "The shadows called me home. Don't look for me. I've found the place where I belong." He broke another rule, didn't he? I asked, though I already knew the answer. We think so. And that brings us to the most important thing I need to tell you tonight. Rule 5 isn't just about what you should or shouldn't do. It's about making a choice. It led me through the terminal toward a section I'd never seen before, an elevator marked "Authorized Personnel Only" that required both Peterson's keycard and a biometric scan to operate. As we descended below the main levels of the airport, I felt the weight of the building pressing down on us, along with something else, an oppressive sense of presence, as if we were entering the heart of something vast and alive. The elevator opened onto a corridor that felt older than the rest of O'Hare, with concrete walls and industrial lighting that cast harsh shadows. The air here was thick, almost viscous, and every step we took echoed strangely, as if the sound were being absorbed and reflected back by unseen surfaces. "This is the original foundation level," Peterson explained as we walked. "O'Hare has been built and rebuilt so many times that there are entire sections of the airport that exist beneath the current structure. And down here is where we keep the most important records." We reached a heavy metal door marked with symbols I didn't recognize. Not quite a cult, but definitely not standard airport signage. Peterson unlocked it with a different key card, one that looked older and more worn than his usual access badge. Inside was an office that defied the industrial nature of the surrounding area. The walls were lined with filing cabinets that stretched from floor to ceiling, and in the center of the room sat an antique desk with a high-back leather chair. Behind the desk, covering the entire back wall, was a massive map of O'Hare, but not any version of the airport I recognized. "This is the true map of O'Hare," Peterson said, gesturing to the wall display. "Every level, every secret corridor, every forgotten space, including the areas that exist separately from normal reality." The map showed familiar terminals and concourses, but also areas labeled with names like the waiting room, the departure gate, and the final terminal. Connected to these spaces by dotted lines were annotations in different handwritings, documenting supernatural encounters going back decades. "Every night shift worker eventually ends up here," Peterson continued. "Usually after they've broken 3 or 4 rules, and the supernatural pressure becomes too much to bear. This is where we explain Rule 5. You must choose which reality you want to belong to." He pulled out a chair for me and sat down across the desk. In the harsh lighting of the underground office, I could see that Peterson looked older than I'd ever noticed before, worn down by years of carrying impossible knowledge. "The truth is, Daniel, that O'Hare exists in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The day shift operates in what we call baseline reality, the normal, mundane world where airports are just buildings and shadows behave according to the laws of physics. But at night, the barriers thin and other realities bleed through." He gestured to the map again. "The whispers come from the memory layer, a dimension where every strong emotion ever felt in this airport has been recorded and preserved. The Hall of Forgotten Flights exists in the lost time layer, where events that should have happened but didn't get stored. The shadows you've been seeing operate in the dark layer, where light and darkness follow different rules. And the unseen passengers, they're trapped in the waiting layer, a dimension of eternal transition where departures never come." The implications of what he was telling me were staggering. "You're saying the airport exists in multiple realities at once. And so do we, once we've broken enough rules. The question is, which reality do you want to call home?" He opened one of the desk drawers and pulled out a thick folder with my name on it. Inside were detailed reports of every supernatural encounter I'd had since starting the job, complete with timestamps, witness accounts, and photographs I'd never seen taken. "Everyone who works the night shift long enough faces this choice," Peterson explained. "You can return to baseline reality, quit the night shift, transfer to days, pretend none of this ever happened. We have procedures to help people readjust, to suppress the memories, and sever the supernatural connections. That sounds like the smart choice. It would be, except for one problem. You've broken 3 rules, Daniel. The supernatural ecosystem of O'Hare has claimed you as one of its own. If you try to leave now, it won't let you go. As if to emphasize his point, the whispers began, but not at their usual 1:47 a.m. schedule. They started immediately, pouring through the ventilation system of the underground office. Daniel, you belong to us now. You can't leave us, Daniel. We won't let you abandon us like everyone else. What's my other option? I asked, though I was afraid to hear the answer. Peterson's expression was grave. You accept your role in the supernatural ecosystem. You become a permanent part of O'Hare's night shift, like Raymond was, like Janet is, like I am. You help maintain the balance between the different reality layers, assist other new workers as they navigate the rules, and ensure that the supernatural elements don't bleed too much into the day shift's baseline reality. You may not be trapped here forever. Not trapped, exactly. You'd have a purpose, a role to play in something larger than yourself. And you'd have companionship, others who understand what you've experienced, who share the burden of maintaining the barriers between realities. He stood up and walked to one of the filing cabinets, pulling out a series of photographs. They showed night shift workers from different decades, men and women in various uniforms, all with the same look in their eyes that I was beginning to recognize in mirrors. The gaze of someone who had seen too much, knew too much, carried too much. Some people find peace in accepting their role, Peterson continued. Raymond did, for 10 years. He helped dozens of new workers navigate the rules, protected them from the worst of what lurks in the other reality layers. But he disappeared because he chose to explore deeper, to push further into the supernatural ecosystem than was safe. That's always a risk, but it's also a choice. Every day, you can choose how much of yourself to give to the other realities, how deep to go, how much to explore. I looked at the map again, noting areas marked with danger symbols and warning annotations. What happens if I refuse both choices? If I just keep working nights and breaking rules? Peterson's face went pale. That's Rule 6, Daniel. The rule we don't like to talk about. Rule 6 is, if you break 5 or more rules, you lose the ability to choose your own fate. The other realities choose for you. He pulled out another folder, this one marked with red warning labels. Inside were photographs of areas of the airport I'd never seen, spaces that looked wrong, where the geometry didn't make sense, where the lighting came from sources that shouldn't exist. These are the absorption zones, Peterson explained. Places where people who broke too many rules ended up. They exist partially in all realities simultaneously, unable to fully belong to any of them. They're conscious, but not in control. They're present, but not able to interact meaningfully with any single reality layer. The photographs showed figures that looked human but wrong. People whose shadows moved independently, whose reflections showed different faces, whose voices echoed from multiple directions at once. Is that what happened to Raymond? We don't know yet, but it's possible. He broke Rule 3 years ago, Rule 1 when he first started, and we suspect he may have broken others without telling us. The weight of the decision pressed down on me like a physical force. Stay and accept a role in maintaining the supernatural ecosystem, or try to leave and risk being absorbed into something inhuman. But as I sat in that underground office, surrounded by decades of documentation of the impossible, I realized that the choice had been made for me the moment I answered the whispers on my first night. I had been drawn into O'Hare's supernatural ecosystem not by accident, but by some quality within myself that resonated with the other realities. I'll stay, I said finally. I'll accept the role. Peterson smiled for the first time since I'd met him, a genuine expression of relief and welcome. I was hoping you'd make that choice. You have the right temperament for this work, Daniel. Compassionate enough to help newcomers, strong enough to resist the deeper temptations. He handed me a new key card, older and heavier than my standard security badge. This will give you access to all the areas you'll need to monitor: the waiting layer, the memory layer, the lost time spaces. Your job will be to help maintain the balance, to guide new night shift workers through the rules, and to prevent any reality layer from becoming too powerful. As we prepare to leave the underground office, I had one final question. What about the unseen passengers in my apartment? The whispers that follow me home. They'll fade as you learn to manage your connections to the other realities, Peterson assured me. Part of accepting your role is learning to control when and how you interact with each layer. You'll still be connected to all of them, but you'll have agency in those connections. When I returned home that morning, my apartment was indeed quieter. The unseen passengers were still there, but they seemed more peaceful, less desperate. The whispers had become a gentle murmur rather than demanding voices. And for the first time in weeks, I was able to sleep. That evening, when I arrived for my shift, Peterson introduced me to a new worker, a young woman named Lisa Park who had just started on the night shift. Her eyes held the same mixture of excitement and apprehension that I remembered from my own first night. Daniel's going to help orient you to our unique work environment, Peterson told her. He'll explain about the special protocols we follow here at night. As I looked at Lisa's eager, innocent face, I realized that my real work was just beginning. I had broken 3 rules and survived. I had chosen my reality and found my purpose. Now it was my responsibility to help others navigate the same treacherous path, to guide them through the rules that govern O'Hare's supernatural ecosystem. First thing you need to know, I told Lisa as we began our walk through Terminal 1, is that there are 6 rules that govern survival on the night shift. Break them at your peril, because once you've broken too many, there's no going back to the normal world. As we walked deeper into the terminal, I could feel the other realities pressing close around us, waiting to see what choices Lisa would make, waiting to discover whether she would become another guardian of the threshold or another casualty of the night shift. The whispers began at exactly 1:47 a.m., and I saw Lisa's head turn toward the sound. Rule 1, I said quietly, placing a gentle but firm hand on her shoulder. Never acknowledge the whispers. No matter what they say, no matter how much they seem to know about you, no matter how desperately they call your name. Lisa nodded, but I could see the curiosity in her eyes, the same dangerous fascination that had led me to break my first rule. The cycle was beginning again, and my role as guardian of the threshold had officially begun. In the distance, I could hear Peterson's voice as he trained another new worker, and beyond that, the eternal sounds of O'Hare at night, not the mechanical hum of a sleeping airport, but the breathing of a living entity that existed across multiple realities, sustained by the choices and sacrifices of those who had accepted their role in maintaining the balance between worlds. I was no longer just Daniel Torres, night shift security guard. I was Daniel Torres, guardian of the threshold, protector of the boundaries between realities, guide for those who would come after me. And despite everything I had lost, my connection to the normal world, my ability to live a conventional life, my innocence about the nature of reality itself, I had found something invaluable in return. I had found my purpose, my place in the vast, impossible ecosystem that was O'Hare Airport after dark. And as Lisa and I continued our patrol through the terminal, I began teaching her the first and most important lesson of the night shift. There are some rules that exist not to restrict us, but to keep us human in a place where humanity is constantly being tested by forces beyond our understanding. The whispers called out to Lisa, trying to learn her name, trying to draw her into conversation. But I was there to guide her, to protect her, to help her make the same choice I had made. The night shift at O'Hare continued, as it always had, as it always would, and the rules remained, waiting to test each new soul brave enough or foolish enough to accept a job in a place where reality grows thin and the impossible becomes routine.